In this module, we will discuss how the PMBOK guide uses processes and process groups to better define the management of a project. The PMBOK guide defines 49 separate processes that may be performed in the management of a project. As mentioned in Module B1, Chapters 4 through 13 of the PMBOK guide each represent a different knowledge area of project management, such as integration, scope, schedule, or cost. Each knowledge area will define several processes that are related to that area of project management. Each process can also be categorized into one of 5 process groups. A process group is simply a collection of processes that share some commonalities, particularly in how they relate to the overall project lifecycle. In the map pictured, you can see how each process fits into exactly one knowledge area, represented by the rows, and one process group, represented by the colored columns. You can also observe that some intersections have multiple processes, while others do not contain any processes. It is recommended that you reference this map throughout your studies as it represents a high-level view of project management. After learning each of the 49 processes discretely, we will work to gain a better understanding of the complex relationships that exist between them. We will refer to this map throughout the course to help us better visualize these relationships. The relationships can be better understood by examining the details of the process, the inputs, the tools and techniques, and the outputs. Processes have perceived relationships when they share common inputs, outputs, or when the output from one process becomes the input to another. Some of these processes could be performed once, multiple times, or not at all on a given project. Many will be repeated in an iterative cycle throughout the project life cycle. Just like the qualifying hours for the PMP application is based upon the 5 project management process groups, the PMP exam is weighted by these process groups. 13% of the exam is based on project initiating. This process group includes just 2 processes which will help to establish the project, its objectives, and prepare for planning. All initiating processes will be represented using the color blue. While there are just 2 processes in this group, consider the information found in chapters 1 through 3 of the PMBOK guide to be part of this 13% as well. 24% of the exam is based on project planning. Project planning contains 24 processes, more than any other process group. This process group contains many tools and techniques and generates many of the project documents found on the exam. Collectively, they will represent a description of what should be done throughout project execution and how the team will address the unique management needs of the project. All planning processes will be represented using the color orange. 31% of the exam will be based on project executing. Project execution contains only 10 processes, far less than planning, yet represents a larger component of the exam. While there will not be as many tools and techniques or outputs to memorize, there will be many important interactions that will take place between these processes and the next process group. All executing processes will be represented using the color green. 25% of the exam will be based on project monitoring and controlling. Project monitoring and controlling contains 12 processes. These processes measure and report the performance of the project and its deliverables and control changes to approved plans. The processes in this group will have many shared tools, techniques, and outputs. All monitoring and controlling processes will be represented using the color purple. The final 7% of the exam covers project closing, which has just one process. Closing processes ensure the proper completion of project phases and the project as a whole. The closing process will be represented using the color red. While the 49 individual processes within each group will have many complex interactions with each other, we can generalize some basic relationships that we can observe for the process groups. All projects and project phases will begin with initiating. This helps establish formal authorization and allows the team to better understand the project environment. Initiating will generally help lead into project planning, where the project team will determine how to manage and perform the work. As you might expect, planning will help to drive project executing. In turn, executing will lead to refinements and additions to the plan. Therefore, we can say that planning feeds executing and executing feeds replanning. As the work for each phase or a project comes to an end, there will be administrative closing processes which should take place. Overseeing this entire exchange are monitoring and controlling processes, which help to compare the results of execution with the plan and aim to minimize any variances that may exist. As we continue to explore the 49 project management processes, it is important to remind ourselves that their implementation is not sequential, but rather an iterative approach. While it is not necessary to complete all 49 processes on a given project, it is fair to say that each project will go through all 5 process groups. In fact, if a project is segmented into different phases, we can say that each phase will also go through each of the 5 process groups. This makes sense since we said that each phase was kind of like a mini project. Due to their sometimes similar terminology, project management process groups are commonly confused with project phases. However, the two represent two different ways of defining projects. Let's take a closer look. Remember that a phase is like a segment of project work, usually ending in an intermediate deliverable. Therefore, project phases should be considered specific or unique to each project, varying based on the size, industry, and other factors. Some projects may have just one phase, while other projects may have more than 10. On the other hand, all projects will go through the same 5 process groups. To help remember this, consider the fact that each phase of a project may go through all 5 process groups. It is important that project phases are not confused with the project management groups that often bear similar names to our phases. Each of the 49 project management processes will be defined by its inputs, tools and techniques, and its outputs. The inputs to a process represent items such as documents that will be useful or required to perform the process. Oftentimes the inputs to a process were outputs from another process. Process tools and techniques represent tangible items or knowledge that we apply to the inputs, hopefully adding some sort of value. By taking our inputs and performing tools and techniques, the process will produce one or multiple outputs. In general, we can say that inputs plus tools and techniques result in outputs. Further, we will find that the outputs of a process will typically become inputs to other project management processes. For example, if we were to define the process of cooking dinner for the family, we could say that inputs may include ingredients, a database of recipes, and lessons learned from your own experience. Oftentimes these inputs were outputs from another process. For instance, the ingredients we need to cook were an output from a different process, shopping. Tools and techniques of cooking dinner may include marinating, basting, roasting, and a convection oven. One of our obvious outputs would include a hot dinner. Additionally, we may have learned some lessons that we can apply to future cooking projects. This would be an output of updating lessons learned. We may also output dirty pots and pans, which would likely become an input to another process, such as cleaning. In general, we can say that inputs plus tools and techniques result in outputs. Further, we will find that the outputs of a process will typically become inputs to other project management processes. Looking back at the high-level view, each of these 49 processes will be defined by several inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. While some will be shared across multiple processes, others may be unique to a single process. Further, the outputs of some processes will become inputs to others, defining a relationship between the processes. For example, the stakeholder register is an output from identify stakeholders and an input to collect requirements. The project management plan is an output from planning and an input to executing. Deliverables are an output of executing and an input to monitoring and controlling. Change requests can be an output from one monitoring and controlling process and an input to another. And a monitoring and controlling process can result in updates to the project management plan. This is just a small example of the many relationships that exist among the processes. Viewing this map of 49 project management processes can help you to visualize the big picture.